Hi, my name's Janice Aitken. I'm an artist and lecturer at Duncan Jordanson College of Art and Design in Dundee. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a very simple little still life in acrylic paint. I thought I'd start with something really simple. So a very basic still life of an apple sitting on a white cloth seemed like a good idea. As always, the very first thing you want to do is have a really good look at your subject. What colours can you see there? How is it placed in the setting? How do you want to compose your picture? You might want to make yourself a little viewfinder that's the right shape for the composition you want. That's actually very useful to help you to look at the negative space in your composition. I've decided that I'm going to offset my apple slightly on the canvas, just so that it doesn't look dead straight on, and also so that I can make the most of these lovely little shadows that are sitting alongside it. On first look, it's pretty much red, light green, with a bit of yellow. Pretty quickly we can see that there are a lot more colours than just those three. We can also see shadows and highlights that are made up of lots of different colours. The closer we look, the more colours we see. It's amazing what you can achieve with only a few simple colours. For this painting, I've used a selection of colours, basically the main primaries, variations of tertiary colours like greens and white. One of the best painting tips I was ever given was to never use black to create shadows. Often shadows contain violets, blues, green, pretty much any colour that you can imagine. I'm painting this on canvas covered paper. You can get pads of it, and it's actually really good because it's thick enough that it doesn't get warped by the water in the paint, but it's also got a lovely texture on it. For palettes, I'm using the lids from plastic carryout containers. Acrylic paint dries out really easily and it's completely useless once it's dry. But plastic containers, you can put the lids on them, and it actually keeps the paint damp for quite a long time. I've had it for a week or so, where I can still go back and use it. In terms of brushes, I tend to use ones that are designed for acrylic paint, and for this painting I just used about 3 or 4 different brushes, a couple of flat-headed ones and a couple of round-headed ones. So now that I've got my palette set up and I've decided what my composition is going to look like, I can start painting. Acrylic paint's really flexible. You can use it sort of like watercolour in thin layers, or the way that I like to use it, you can really lay it on quite thick and obliterate whatever's underneath. So it really doesn't matter if you make a mistake. Because you can create layers and you can paint over things, it's actually quite good to start with something that is not just a plain white background. It gives you something for your colours to resonate against. And it's also really good for people who, like me, don't really like staring at a blank white sheet of paper and wondering where to start. So here I'm putting down a sort of a layer and an initial drawing in a nice kind of bluey green, emerald green colour. Although when I'm finished you won't actually see any of that green, you might get little hints of it just shining through, and it's great for helping the colours to sing against each other while I'm painting. It's really important to keep looking at the subject. You should really be looking at the subject even more than you're looking at your own painting. One of the biggest mistakes that people make when they first start is that they start fixating on what the marks on paper look like, but lose the likeness of the object because they're not actually looking at it hard enough. Of course, that only applies when you're trying to get a likeness, or when you're trying to make something that actually looks as much like the subject of the painting as possible. Obviously, this tutorial is really just about painting a likeness of an object. And it's really important to remember that this is only one of many thousands of ways to make a painting. I'm sure there's quite a few of you looking at this and thinking, well, hang on a minute, she's not even drawing this before she starts. That's a personal choice. The way that I work, I prefer to draw with paint. As an artist, I'm not actually as good at drawing as I am at painting. And I find drawing with a paintbrush much easier than drawing with a pencil first. But that's entirely up to you. If you want to draw pencil outline before you start, that's absolutely fine. As I said, lots and lots of different ways of making paintings. So one of the things that you might also notice is that I'm drawing in the shapes of the shadows. I find that it's easier to get an accurate rendering of what a shadow looks like if you treat it almost as if it's a separate object in itself, and you treat every single part of the canvas as just as important as the object. Shadows are really important because what they do is they situate the object within the setting, and they give it a feeling of solidity and three-dimensionality. So now that I've finished my underpainting and my basic drawing, I'm just going to leave this to dry for a little while and maybe go and make myself a wee cup of tea. So here's a top tip. Never put your cup of tea down beside your water pot. So now I'm ready to start applying the colour. What I'm doing here is just adding the sort of first layer of the colour, and you can see to start with applying red on top of that green, it's quite dark, it's not particularly apple coloured, but I think the important thing here is to just block in the colours, apply a layer that sort of just gives you that foundation of reasonably accurate colours that you can then add to and take away from. I've speeded this section up a bit because the painting altogether took about 45 minutes to an hour. And obviously you don't want to just sit and watch me painting for all of that time. But I think you can get a pretty good idea of the sort of first layer of colour that I'm adding. So what I'm going to do now is start to apply some of these colours that I was talking about to the areas that are in shadow. You can see that I've mixed up some violets, some pinks, very, very pale. I'm not going to go absolutely crazy with these colours, but at the same time, I think at this point it's really, really important that we don't go for pure white. So I'm just slowly building up that first layer of colour, and I'm making sure that I'm not ignoring any part of the canvas. You can really see how that off-white colour that I've mixed up is definitely not pure white when you see it up against the paper. And you can see there that I'm actually, I mean, that's a proper blue that I'm using in there. That's the area where there's two shadows crossing over each other, and that's just that little bit darker and a little bit more blue shaded. And again, I'm mixing different colours with the white just to make sure that we're not using pure white. The only place that I'll put pure white on the whole painting is on any highlights, and that way it makes sure that the highlights are absolutely the shiniest area in the painting. So I'm just finishing up that first layer of colour. I'm still keeping it reasonably rough, and then I'll let that dry for a little while, remembering always to keep looking back at the subject matter. The next stage I'm going to go on to is adding a little bit more detail and working a little bit more with layers of colour. One of the questions that I get asked quite a lot is about whether or not you can mix acrylic colour and oil colour. And the answer to that is please don't. It's not a good idea. They're both made from completely different chemicals, and oil and water don't mix, as you probably know. It is possible to do some underpainting in acrylic, and then as long as you let it dry really, really well before you paint over it, you can then move on to creating an oil painting on top. If you think about it in terms of if you pour some water and some oil into a glass, the oil will always rise to the top, and that'll help you to remember that you can put oil on top of water, but you cannot put water-based paint on top of oil. So you can see here that I'm just adding more and more detail. Just really at this point looking very, very carefully at the apple, looking at where the darkest bits are. And I'm using a sort of mixture of purple and Payne's grey to put in the very, very darkest areas. Again, I never use black for any of that because it just completely deadens the colour of the image. You'll also notice that when I'm painting the apple, I'm using the brush strokes to sort of emphasise the shape. So every time I'm putting paint on, it's continuing to sort of emphasise the roundness and the spherical nature of the object that I'm painting. The other thing you might notice is that I'm using a slightly thinner brush. The more detail I start to get into, the thinner the brush that I'm using. That's, generally speaking, that's a sort of rule of thumb that you can start off with the very broad strokes when you're at the early stages of a painting. Certainly the way that I work, I tend to get finer and finer with the detail as I go along. This is a perfect example of what I was talking about before, about how acrylic is great when you want to paint over something. So you've seen, as I've been painting, you know, there's very little of the original underpainting left. I've just continued to add layer on layer of slightly, subtly different colours, slightly different brush strokes. And each one, although it's kind of obliterating what's underneath, there is still a sort of a shadow of what's underneath. So every layer is important, and every layer informs the one that comes on top of it. So now that I've got quite a lot of detail in the object, remembering what I said about treating the entire canvas as equally important, I'm going to spend a little bit more time just refining the background. As you can see, I'm having a little bit more fun with the violets and the blues, and really kind of scrunching my eyes up, trying hard to find the different colours that are within the background. So I'm adding sort of slight green colours. There's a sort of a pinkiness coming off the apple itself that I'm trying to get in there. So at this point, what I'm going to do is just leave the video running, let you watch as I put what are probably going to be the final touches to the painting, and just let you see how I'm finishing it off. So, hope you enjoyed watching that. Here's the finished painting. Please remember that anybody can have a go at making art, and please don't feel that other people will judge you. Just paint for yourselves and enjoy it.